I saw an ad in the early 2000s in a local newspaper in Surrey for a casino and games manager. And I thought, wow, it sounds edgy. Yeah, this will be fun. And I joined Gala Coral as a casino and games manager, and it was just a fantastic sort of learning ground and totally new to the industry. In 2014, I got to work one morning, and the chief exec at the time and the chief HR officer pulled me in and said, "You're in a lot of trouble, but we're going to help you because you need help." And that human side of how I was looked after there. The evening after that happened, I was in my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and that was the first day of my recovery, which was 11 years ago, and not had a drug or a drink since. When that moment of sort of surrender came, and I was like, okay, this is it. There is this level of peace and serenity that flows through your body because all of the shame and the lies and the worries and the fears, they're all out in the open now. Is where we all take a big sigh of relief, right? And it's like, okay, now I'm at level 0 and I can rebuild and regrow here.
Welcome to the iGaming Leader podcast, where we uncover the human side of some of the most inspirational leaders in our industry. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and as an ex-iGaming director turned performance coach, I've worked with over 200 leaders from companies like Entain, 365, Flutter, and many more to help them build the habits to achieve sustainable high performance. In these episodes, we share exactly what it takes for you to achieve the same. So with that being said, let's dive in. Hey, and welcome to the iGaming Leader podcast. Today, I'm joined by somebody who's been in the industry for 20 plus years, been part of 1.1 billion pounds of successful exits. I was Chief Commercial Officer at Betsson, Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at NYX during their acquisition, SVP and Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at OpenBet, and has recently founded a new business around a topic that is really close to my heart and really important to us as an industry, together actually with one of our mastermind members, which we'll cover later on today as well. But behind all of his success is a very, very dark and troubled foundation that he's kept hidden for a very long time, which we'll talk about today as well. Huw, welcome to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here, Leo, and thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm super today. Thanks very much.
We've had the pleasure of recently talking and meeting each other, and really inspired by your story, mate. I wanted to start off with kind of the highs of your successes, and you've been in the industry for a very, very long time. And I'd like people to understand the scale of what you've achieved. Like I said in the beginning, you've been part of major businesses, successful exits. And can you tell us a little bit more about your journey? How you got into the industry, and your progress throughout your career.
I saw an ad in the early 2000s in a local newspaper in Surrey, where I was living at the time, for a casino and games manager. And I thought, wow, this sounds edgy. And I'd been working on a couple of failed startups with a couple of friends. It was during that sort of, early .com sort of, boom. And we tried and failed a couple of little startups. And I saw this and I thought, this will be fun for a while. And so that was about sort of 2003, 2004, and I joined Gala Coral as a casino and games manager, and it was just a fantastic sort of learning ground and totally new to the industry, right? And I can remember sort of back in the day, I got to meet Evolution, right, and 2004 when they were first getting going, and I can remember these conversations around, we're going to stream live casino and it's going to be, the next big thing. And really it was a kind of vision and a pipe dream that they had, remembering in 2004, we had like download speeds of 2 to 4 megabytes at home, which were key, right? And here were these like couple of Swedish guys who thought that video streaming was like, the next best thing. And that's absolutely what inspired me. It was these sorts of people that were charting new territories. And remember back then as well, we had very little regulation, and the entities were quite small, so there was like zero sort of market consolidation, very new. Just what a fantastic sort of fast-paced, edgy industry to be a part of, and it had me hooked from day one. So that's where I started, and then moved to Betsson in Malta. And Betsson, when I joined in Malta, was probably a couple of hundred people, no more, and obviously today a giant organization, and all the rest of it. And I sort of worked my way up at Betsson and became chief commercial officer in sort of 2014 or 2012, 2013. And from there, went to NYX Gaming Group, right, which was a gaming platform led by Matt Davey. And there I was chief strategy and marketing officer. So we kind of built that business out for a couple of years. Matt and the team had been on it for many, many years and had done a wonderful job by the time I got there. And then we sold that business to Scientific Games for 631 million, which was, a big number, but it was right at that point where some of the bigger operators like Scientific Games were looking at how to get into this world of iGaming, and then became part of the big Scientific Games, now Light and Wonder, became part of that crew, and looked after strategy and marketing there for the iGaming business. And then we carved out OpenBet, right, which was the sports betting platform that we'd acquired along the way. We carved out OpenBet, and then we sold that to Endeavor. Endeavor's the company that owns UFC and IMG and WME and all the rest of that. So then I became an Endeavor employee, and had a fantastic, ride there. And I think all the way along, I felt like I was kind of lucky to be in the right place at the right time with the right people around me.
We hear it in every story, right, where massive success is being in the right place at the right time. But it's not just that, right? I think that always undersells ourselves, which is quite typical for high achievers. Underselling your own achievements and your own performance. I'd like to kind of go back through that journey a little bit. What were some of the things that you were most proud of in that journey that you've had in your career progress?
The human stories are the ones that I remember most, and I'm a very sort of human person, and not so strong on analytical financial stuff, but very strong on human, very strong on creativity. I think one of the high points, I was working in India for a while with Betsson, and we were looking at that market, and I was based in Calcutta, and I had a member of my team, a female member of my team who came to join, and massive imposter syndrome, because on a cultural level, deep cultural level, she had been told throughout her childhood that the place for a female was at home, was not in the workplace. And so when she became part of our team, this was imposter syndrome, not just an anxiety or a fear or a worry. This was deep rooted fear, and really sort of counterculture, going against everything that she had been brought up to know and to learn. And in my conversations with her, this came to light, right? And so, I did a load of work with her on a very sort of personal level, tears, very teary conversations, her throwing the towel in occasionally, saying, I don't know whether I can handle this. And she was amazing, right, at what she did. Really hardworking, really thoughtful, really energetic, really bright. And so over the course of a couple of years, we worked together, very, very closely to share each other's vulnerabilities and to try and sort of carve out this fear and create some sort of path that she could go down where she felt comfortable and valued, and that she was doing the right thing. And to cut a long story short, she is now a C-suite executive, absolutely smashing it. And it's funny because, when I talk to her, she feels indebted to me. But really, as is often the case, I'm sure you find it too, when you're helping people and supporting people, the amount that you learn about yourself and and the fears that surface as you're having these sorts of discussions within yourself, they become extremely important lessons as we go along, and a lot of that comes from helping others, and that's the story, really.
Two big things that I pick up from that. The first one is that through all the successes of big businesses, exits, progress,
Yeah,
um, executive roles, the thing that stands out for you the most is not the titles, and it's not the money, and it's not the things that the money were, able to buy you. It was the human side of it, right? It's one specific
that's it.
individual in one specific journey that still is important to you today. And I think, and the other thing that I I really love about it is that we can the things that we could do can really leave a mark on people, right? It can change their trajectory as well. And this is true in anybody that we interact with in any shape or form in our businesses. And let's dive into that a little bit more, you. When was the first time that you noticed that human elements to leadership were so important to you?
My dad is still alive, and he's a decorated military officer. And he, at one point in his career, he was commander of what they call the Rapid Reaction Force, right, which is a NATO military unit that can be deployed anywhere in the world within 24 hours. And so, high profile, high risk, all the rest of that. And I can remember asking my dad one day, bearing in mind that I think this unit was 1,000 or more people of various different military sort of units, including, special forces and all the rest of that. So, and I remember asking him, I was like, Dad, what's the most important thing about your job right now? And I can remember specifically asking him this, and he said to me, well, I tell you what he didn't say to me. He didn't say to me, it's to win every battle. It's to, plant a British flag. It's to, get home and get medals and all the rest of it. The answer he gave me when I asked him, what the most important part of his job was, it was to look after the well-being of men and women under his command at all times. All right. So very military sort of, look after the well-being. But this kind of stuck with me. And the way that he sort of describes it was, if you come back from winning a battle or whatever it is, and you've got, 17 people in hospital and, 50 suffering from PTSD, is that a victory? Is that a victory? For people watching this who are not familiar with the military, they pay just enormous amounts of attention to the wellness of their people, whether that's the food that they serve them, the activities that they do, the mental, side of being in that world. And that's really, where I sort of picked up, and I saw firsthand, the camaraderie and the humanness of, these men and women who are going out to do probably the most dangerous work in the world, coming back, and it wasn't the technicalities and, the finance side of it and all the rest of it that there was the glue that held them together. It was the human connections that they had with each other, the trust, the empathy, the honesty, the courage, that they had collectively was what got them, out there and back safely. And so yeah, so that's where it comes from, I think. And I tried to reflect on that throughout my career, and it's been super helpful.
And you throughout that whole success and your fast progress, there is also an underlying dark side that kind of mentioned in the beginning, a really difficult period that you've gone through, something that you've battled along for a very long time. And then suddenly you got called into the office 2014, expecting nobody to be aware of your challenges. Take me back to that moment and what actually happened.
So 2012, I'd been at Betsson for a while and sort of worked my way up to chief commercial officer, big team, big responsibility. And to be honest, what happened was the pressure I could feel building. All right. So, lots of direct reports, lots of, big targets, high pressure and all the rest of it. And what started out as drinking to sort of decompress, became drinking to numb. All right. And that's really where I would say my alcoholism, and I'm happy to call it that today, is that's exactly where it started, with the using alcohol to numb the pain and to take the pressure away. And
Yep.
what happens when I know now, what happens when I numb pain, or when people try to numb pain, you also numb joy at the same time, because you can't selectively, numb one or the other. So you become numb. And that means that, emotions of happiness and joy and connection and fall away, along with, momentarily feelings of anxiety and fear and pressure, they get numbed. And in the end, my drinking was so heavy that I was, drinking to blackout most nights. I would wake up the next morning, shaking, having to go to work, put on a brave face to try and freshen up. And I started using Valium in the morning to sort of calm myself down a little bit. But you can imagine what is happening now. So I'm sort of into blackout, out the other side, into Valium, trying to control my drinking during the day. There was a huge urge for me to sort of have a drink to try and top up. And, it's classic sort of addiction, feelings of addiction. And despite my best efforts to try and not drink during the day, I would try and push out my drinking to the following evening when I was behind closed doors. Eventually that drinking sort of crept up. So, I would have to have a drink at lunchtime, and then I was like, okay, I'm never going earlier than lunchtime. And 3 weeks later, it was mid-morning, and then it was breakfast time. So at that point, I'm feeling like I'm really in a black hole, unaware really that anyone else kind of knew about it, thought I was keeping, fairly tight control on it. And, this industry as well is, let's say, sort of oblivious is the wrong word, but, forgiving maybe, right? Forgiving of, work hard, play hard. And then in 2014, I got to work one morning, and the chief exec at the time and the chief HR officer pulled me in and said, "You're in a lot of trouble." And I thought, shit, I'm about to get written warning, verbal, whatever it is. And they said, "But we're going to help you because you need help." And that human side of how I was looked after there is something that I'll never forget. And the evening after that happened, I was in my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And that was the first day of my recovery, which was 11 years ago, and not had a drug or a drink since. So I actually emailed the chief exec and the chief HR officer at the time. I messaged them actually on LinkedIn last week, and I said, just kicked off this recovery in gaming, but I want you to know that, you were really the catalyst for everything that has happened, since I got sober, and I wanted to thank you for that. So
Amazing, you. Well done. Great journey. And again, it goes to show that an intervention like that, right, where just one single moment can make a huge difference in somebody's trajectory. I want to dive into some of the things that you've said there, because I can find myself in that story. How I think you were 35, right, when you were promoted. I was 33 when I was promoted as the youngest director. I felt a lot of pressure, and I was also drinking at night just to relieve that pressure, feel like numbing my mind, right? I felt complete, as if there was, completely brain fried every day. So, but a lot of people do, right? A lot of people have a pint after work, or just need to decompress before coming home. The real difficulty, people, is to understand when it's an issue and when it's not, and when it's okay and when it's not okay. And I think there's a real fear as well, almost, to admit it's a problem. Maybe you're kind of wondering in your own head whether or not it's an issue, but you also don't want to be stigmatized, or you're fearful of the identity change that it might create when you have to stop drinking or when you need to stop drinking. So I want to talk a little bit about the beginning part of that. Early, just having a pint after work, or just feeling completely stressed after work, and having a few drinks. Like, how do you know when it's something that you should probably talk about?
Very good question, isn't it? And it's a very, very big question, because I think also, we're all on some sort of spectrum with our drinking. And for me personally, the moment of powerlessness was the moment when I realized I was no longer in control. And if I think back to that time, those moments when I physically could not stop myself going to the fridge on my own first thing in the morning, to have a drink. There is a line that I've crossed there. And, you could say, well, it's the time of day that you're drinking, which is the line that you've crossed. But I would say that it's, if you feel, and I would be shaking at the time, and literally being drawn, feeling like I'm some sort of magnet towards the drink. And that intensity, of that pull and that draw to the drink, you can feel it sort of inside you. And then the utter relief that comes as soon as the alcohol hits your bloodstream. And if you feel this deep seated sort of urge that life will not be the same, or the afternoon or the evening would not be the same until I get a drink. Now, that's something which I think should spark off something in people's minds. I think as soon as you had one thought around, am I drinking too much? The answer is probably yes, right? Because otherwise,
Yeah. Does that mean that you need to change everything, or does that just mean have a chat with someone to see if it's actually an issue, check in with yourself? For many people, the problem is that when they have a thought of, am I actually drinking too much? They feel that, well, I wouldn't classify myself as an alcoholic, because an alcoholic is X, Y, Z, and they, whatever the
Yeah.
label, whatever the view is that they have on it. But also, I think people are very fearful to have that conversation, because it might mean that maybe they're the person that is always the first one to go out. Maybe that's how they're known by their friends or their family. Maybe they don't even see how they can have fun anymore if they wouldn't go out for a drink. So they're very fearful of giving up the alcohol. And that might be that conversation might be the first point of that. So what is the next step after that? What does that look like? And what are your options? And yeah, we'll paint a picture a little bit about what that looks like for people.
Everyone has got to kind of reach their own point, right, in recovery. And I see lots of people who struggle with their drinking, but until it becomes a problem of a certain size, there is no point anyone else trying to sort of get them to stop drinking or to slow down their drinking or whatever. Because, if someone is addicted to something, outside pressure often actually adds fuel to the fire. But, if I was struggling again, and this is how I help people in the program right now, is, those first conversations really, really matter, don't they? And I think that if people are harboring these anxieties around drinking or drug taking, the first thing to do is to chat to someone who you love and you trust, and to have that open conversation. And I think it's the first step to solving nearly all of life's problems, is to, in some respects, admit, surrender to the problem in some shape, put your hand up and say, I'm not entirely sure where I am right now, but I know that it's causing me pain here and it's causing me pain in my head. I'm thinking about it too much.
It's such a big step, right? Some people are so fearful of that. The other thing that you mentioned there earlier in your story, I think is also really important. It's this moving of boundaries, right? I think it's something we're all guilty of. I'm not necessarily talking about alcohol, but in general, we all kind of go, well, yeah, well, I've done this thing now, but gee, it won't happen again. We'll move our own boundaries, right? We're very, might be harsh on ourselves in many cases, but we also say, but this is okay for now, as long as I don't do X, Y, Z later. And I think in alcoholism, that is certainly something that happens a lot because it's not something that happens overnight, right? It's something that progressively gets worse, and you don't see it as an issue because you'll keep moving those boundaries.
There's always some sort of justification for it in my experience, right? And it's like, and this is how the disease of addiction, and I believe it is a disease, by the way, is we say that it's sort of cunning and powerful and baffling because it is a trick of the mind, all of the time, which is, oh, I've had an even more stressful day than I did yesterday. Oh, if everyone else was going through the same sort of pressure that I was having, they would be drinking the same too. Or, I drink less than so-and-so. The mind can find all sorts of different ways to sort of justify, and it takes a level of sort of self-awareness that is normally with me when I was in the depths of my alcoholism, zero self-awareness, and the mind is gone. But it takes a little moment of clarity and only one moment of clarity to really sort of bridge that gap between being able to draw a halt to the addiction or continuing for some time until something catastrophic happens. You lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your wife, you lose your, whatever. And it's unfortunately with addiction, it is more often than not a catastrophic issue that actually prompts someone then to reach out and say, okay, give up. I'm busted. I'm in a lot of trouble. I've had quite a few friends of friends who've reached out who've got children who've had addiction issues, and obviously they've been very, very upset, and they're talking to me about like, what can we do and how can we help them and how can we do this. And my advice is always the same: is unfortunately there's very little that you can do to sort of push someone into recovery. It's just not going to happen. And unfortunately, sometimes the best thing is something catastrophic. You just want to make sure, obviously, that it's not a life and death thing, but people have got to find their own rock bottom in some situations to prompt them to have what we call the gift of desperation, right?
But don't you think that's true almost everywhere? Like if we take this beyond alcohol, talk about weight loss, talk about, I don't know, any sort of behavior change, that because we're creatures of comfort, because we're creatures of habits, we have these behaviors. And although we don't like the behaviors, the easiest thing to do is to keep the habits. It's very difficult to break habits.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it takes in most cases, I believe, it takes a catastrophic event, or it takes a real deep, deep, dark moments to provide the fuel that we need, gives the motivation to actually break the behaviors that we have that no longer serve us, right?
I do think that's true entirely. I mean, not only think that that's true, I actually know that to be true, because I run recovery meetings. I see people at the various stages of recovery. I see husbands who've been forced into recovery and those that have come because they've, surrendered and accepted and all. And when that moment finally came for me, and bearing in mind I've been drinking blackout for many months and Valium and all the rest of it, when that moment of sort of surrender came and I was like, okay, this is it. There is this level of peace and serenity that flows through your body, because all of the shame and the lies and the worries and the fears, they're all out in the open now, right? And there's nowhere to go. And so this level of peace found me very, very quickly. And I think that's true. I mean, you will know because you work with, lots of exceptional leaders and sort of transformation journeys that moment of acceptance and out into the open of problems, is where we all take a big, sigh of relief, right? And it's like, okay, now I'm at level 0 and I can rebuild and regrow here. So I think if anyone is worried about, their drinking or worried that they might be addicted to drugs or alcohol, the message is that there is a window of peace and serenity, which is literally one step away. And it is there for everyone. And I know that to be true, not for myself, but for lots and lots and lots of people that I've helped over the years. Is I didn't realize that this feeling of no shame and acceptance, I didn't realize that was going to be available to me. And it was like, it's right there. It's just literally one step away.
Yeah, it's just your mouth the way, right? It's just talking about it, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest challenge for most of us, is that we all keep it inside. The lies as we tell ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, the justification, the moving of boundaries like we spoke about. The industry is so full of pressure. It's so fast paced. There's a real drinking culture in the drinking and drug culture, actually. I mean, go to any conference and you see it left, right, and center. How would you advise people to deal with that pressure? That is perhaps in a healthier way than just drinking it away or numbing your brains.
One of the tools that I have found most helpful in recovery, and it's a tool that anyone who's been in recovery will know about, and it's called a sort of personal inventory.
Yeah.
All right, so it's a very short exercise every day. Takes 3 minutes maximum. If it's taking any longer than 3 minutes, then it's probably too deep. But it's to think about how your day has been, what has troubled you, and this is a very short writing exercise. What is troubling you, where you've done well, where you haven't done so well. And importantly, like if there are any sort of, apologies or any amends that you need to make or whatever it is. Now, and it takes a couple of minutes, all right? And I have a book here which is full of my daily inventories and, bad behaviors, good behaviors, people I need to say sorry to and all the rest of it. But the whole process of that is to pick out patterns, right? And I think, we talk about, the pressures of everyday life in the gambling industry and events and all the rest of it. I just wish that I had had little tools like this along the way to help me stop, behaviors and actions that were not serving me, and that level of, introspection. And by the way, some of my daily introspections are just like scrappy notes, so it's not very detailed, but just a little bit of daily reflection over a course of, a month or two really helps to kind of you to see the black and white of your life, in a way that it doesn't happen if you think about it.
When your brain is fried at the end of the day, right, and you're numbing it because that's the only way out, I think there's 3 things happening. One is we think we're at the mercy of that. We think that it's just a consequence of the day, our brain being completely fried. And I think there's many things. I think the first step is you've got to take more control, and you've got to look at, okay, how can I actually make sure that I don't feel completely brain fried at the end of the day, right? Then the second bit is the numbing, right? Okay, so if I'm brain fried, I think for most people, it's just that they don't have a tool belt of tools to help with relieving that pressure. And I think the third thing is also about giving it words, the feelings that you go through, the stresses that you have, but being able to actually describe that and being able to, and I think I'd imagine writing is a big piece of that, right? And I think very often it's just, we almost feel like we're on a train. And yeah, it's inevitable. Of course I'm drinking because I'm brain fried. Of course I'm brain fried because it's been a stressful day. And it's like we're a passenger. I think all of the stuff that we're talking about here is actually taking control and ownership and responsibility.
I really like that, Leah. And I think there is there is the accountability piece I totally align with. I think on the control piece, it's really interesting. Control as a topic is really interesting, like what we can control and what we can't control. And I think in my own life, there are only, and in my business life at all, there are only a very small amount of things that I can control. Can't control people think of me, can't control, whether I get, this or that and all the rest of it. And I think that that's partly where my issues in the pressure side of things came from, was because thinking that I had to control everything.
Yeah. Okay. Great point. Yeah.
I've got to control, the numbers. I've got to control my team. I've got to control the strategy. I've got to control having to control everything. When in actual fact, there were probably, 4 or 5 things per day maximum that I can do to affect change and, the biggest drivers of change. And knowing what those are means that you don't have to worry about the 4,000 other things which are rattling around in my head,
Yes.
where I think I've got control over.
Yes. Really love that, you, because that's true, isn't it? There's so many things that are outside of our control. And because we're always focused on the short-term results, the short-term pressures, you can't, the fact that, profits are down yesterday because of some bad results, it's like not going to do anything about it today, really, are you? Okay. I want to talk a little bit about connection, mentorship. Tell me a little bit more about what you do today and how we spoke about this before, right? How your mess has become your message. What does recovery in gaming look like? Why did you start it? And what does the future look like for you? What are some of the things that you want to be doing with this?
The story of recovery, about me now. So, and I think over the years, I've helped quite a few people in the gambling industry sort of get onto a path of recovery, which has been amazing. And, something which is really meaningful, right? So aside from business and all the rest of it, this is a real meaningful part of my life. And I was sat here in this office at home a couple of weeks ago, really, and I stumbled across an article which was all about doctors in recovery and how these doctors all around the world, because they're all in the same industry, they were getting together and sharing their experiences of being in recovery, but also being doctors. And I suddenly thought, there is nothing out there for the gambling industry. And why is that? And also that I'd never heard anyone really mention recovery. I looked through sort of agendas from previous events and speaker agendas, and I could see nothing. I could see lots on responsible gambling, of course, which, the industry does a wonderful job on now, but nothing that really talked about recovery. So I thought about it for a couple of days. I wrote down some notes. I wrote a little bit of a plan, and then I started reaching out to a couple of other people that I know are in recovery. And I said, should we do this? And I tested it with 3 or 4 different people, and they were like, this is just, this is it's really needed. Secondly, there's nothing like it. And so, so we put together a little plan and got some people on board. And really the purpose is sort of twofold, really. One is to lift up the topic of addiction in the industry from alcohol and drugs. And then the second one is to provide, a safe space, if you like, an anonymous but safe space for people like we've just spoken about, who might be on the edge, who might have gone over the edge. At least they know now through this podcast and through some of the stuff that we're doing, that there are people there who they can get in contact with and reach out. And, this really is a life and death scenario. And I have had the unfortunate experience of, having to attend funerals and having to watch families at funerals who are, burying or cremating loved ones. And I tell you, it is a horror that no one should have to go through. So the aim of this group really is to help a few souls along the way. And so that's what we do.
Really love it, you. And it's so important. I mean, I had Mark Smith on the podcast, who I know you spoke to about this as well. And he spoke about his own suicidal thoughts as a result of his struggles with alcohol. And Lee similarly spoke about how he's, his battles with alcohol, and who you're doing this together with, who just seen very many friends as well going through similar challenging journeys. And it's all about just being able to talk with others, right? Just being able to no longer having to keep this dark secret inside of yourself. So if people feel that they're maybe, like you said, on the edge, or maybe before the edge, or maybe over the, no matter where they are on that spectrum that you described before, what should they do? How do they get in touch with you and with the Recovery in Gaming?
Perfect. So, I mean, I think number one is go to the website, recoveryingaming.com, and there you will find all sorts of different stuff. But you will find our contact details. And I think Lee and I have both got our mobile numbers there. There's an anonymous WhatsApp chat that you can join, or you can message on LinkedIn or whatever it is. And I think this comes back to that first step, isn't it? It's reaching out and making some point of contact. And in my experience, alcoholics working with alcoholics and addicts working with addicts, that's exactly how we all get well. And that's the best thing to do.
Thank you very much for your time today. Great mission.
Thanks, Liam.
Thank you for joining me on the iGaming Leader podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, head over to igamingleader.com for more conversations and insights. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. I'm your host, Leo Judkins, and I hope to see you next week.